Bus Ride.
Well, good morning, everyone. Certainly glad to be back to the ATU convention. It's great to be with all of you, and it's always great to join the activists of this union to try to project a message not only to you, but to the members that you represent across America. A message of hope, a message of solidarity, and a message of making sure that every day we wake up and remember that what we do as trade unionists is we try to empower people in the workplace so they can empower themselves, their families, their communities, and to do the things that we need to do to make this movement strong and to make this country great. And that's really what you're doing here when you come here to engage in the process of debating your future and trying to do what's right for your members. ATU has always been a leader in the Transportation Trades Department from its very early days. It has always been a very forceful advocate for the members that you all fight to represent, but also a very willing participant in fighting for the jobs and the rights of all transportation workers. I want to thank your union for always welcoming me. Thank you for that very nice introduction, and thank you for bringing me together with all of you so that I can thank you for the work that you do as part of a broader movement. Transportation labor had a vision a long time ago to create the Transportation Trades Department. And that vision only worked if we could come together as a group of unions across 5 modes of transportation in a vast country with very, very different points of view and perspectives, and come together with a unified agenda about making sure that transportation labor is a very important and vocal segment of the American labor movement. And as a member of TTD and as a proud participant in all the things that we do, ATU has always been a very important voice in making sure we do the right thing, no matter what kind of worker in transportation is at risk, whether he or she works in public sector, private sector, and whichever mode of transport they earn a living. Standing here with you today, I cannot help but recall the last ATU convention that I addressed back in September of '07. Thinking back to that day, it is hard to believe how different the world looked then than it looks today. In 2007, we gathered under the cloud of a White House that truly had declared war on America's labor movement, a White House that had ignored the needs of working people, and a White House that had turned its back on the nation's public transit systems and more broadly our transportation system as a whole, and of course their workers and their unions. In 2007, we stood at a moment in time that told all of us, our movement, that change couldn't come soon enough. Remember what we had at stake as the election was running up. We had one of the most vigorous privatizers in the history of modern politics running for president, John McCain. And we didn't know at that time, but less than 1 year after your convention in September of '07, the nation's financial system collapsed. Millions of working families lost their jobs, their homes, their dreams, and too many Americans, including I'm sure many of your members, were losing hope. We did not know at the time, but our nation was about to fall in the deepest recession since the Great Depression. And just as surely we didn't know the peril our nation faced, we also didn't know whether Americans would choose a new direction for this country. We did not know that just over 1 year after that convention, America would elect a president who was and is a friend of working people and the labor movement. And we did not know that we would elect a Congress that, while not perfect by any means, would begin anew fighting for the middle class. And we did not know the victories that we would win, even in the face of our nation's ongoing crisis. Since that 2007 convention of the ATU, we have taken some critical steps, and for your members, none have been more important than reviving the debate about the importance of mass transit to this nation. None have been more important than passing an economic recovery bill that directed billions to public transit and then working together to redirect some of those funds so that a portion of capital dollars could go to operating expenses. Don't think for a minute that if Sarah Palin was in the White House, we would have ever had a penny to go to mass transit in this country. Don't you ever forget that it matters what happens in elections, and it matters what you do in elections. You did that because your transit systems and your members were bleeding. Services were slashing, jobs were cut, fares were being raised. At a time when, if you think about it, mass transit was a part of our future, a part of our solutions to all the problems we have in our economy. And you fought like hell to say the following: if you're gonna revive this economy from the Bush economy, if you're gonna ensure we keep our public services going during this horrific recession, if you're going to make sure our teachers keep teaching our kids and our firefighters and our police keep saving lives, then damn it, we better ensure that we've got transit workers delivering the transit systems that our country needs. That should be the message going forward. That effort was an important one, and ATU should be proud of it, but we have a lot more work to do. We have changed the nature of the debate because we have a president of the White House who actually cares about you and your members. But it was just a first step. We're at a very important moment in time for this union and for our public transportation system. Important because our public transit systems and workers face severe challenges that require a national response. Important because our agenda is making progress, but needs a strong push to accomplish some of our most critical goals. Important because we face a grueling midterm election, and I'll have more to say about that in a moment. But it also is an important moment for a bigger reason. It feels like America is truly approaching a moment of choosing. And my friends, the choosing that America must do is not just about a single election or even 2 or 3 elections. It's about something more fundamental. Choice about the kind of nation we want to be. And that choice runs deeper than which party or candidate we may pull the lever for in November. It's a choice about the goals we as a nation are going to pursue and the ones we're going to let slide. A choice about the values that we as a nation are going to uplift and the values we're going to forsake. The choices we make are going to be reflected in just about everything we do going forward from today, from the kinds of public investments we make in transportation and our overall infrastructure, the way we regulate our businesses, and the way we treat working people in this country and empower them to come together to form and join unions. And there are a lot of ways to define that choice. A lot of pundits like to talk about progressives versus conservatives, or a choice between democratic ideals and Republican ideals, or big government and small government. All that talk obscures a real choice, brothers and sisters. To me, the choice is about this: whether we as a nation are going to be builders or if we're going to be a nation of borrowers and consumers forever. Let me explain what I mean by that. Many of us remember a time in America when we built things here. We built cars, we built TVs, we built computers, we built highways, we built railroads, we built universities, we built public schools, we built an army that won world wars, we built businesses that were meant to last, public institutions that were meant to endure, and a labor movement that was supposed to uplift the middle class and help working people. And we put in motion a plan to build a public transit system that was second to none, making real progress, and we have made real progress, in the historic surface transportation bills of the last 20 years. And all that building made America the greatest nation in the world. It made us a nation in which working men and women could earn a decent wage, could live in a home, in a good home, in a strong community, and send their kids to quality schools, and maybe, just maybe, give them a chance for a better future than you had. That America, that building America, was a truly great place. But somewhere along the line, our building spirit got sidetracked. It didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen because our people got lazy. What happened is that some very smart and some very greedy people in positions of power realized that they could increase their profits and maximize their power by selling the American people a bill of goods. Rather than calling on Americans to sacrifice in order to build things that last, They encourage people to borrow and consume, to focus on immediate gratification rather than long-term value. They told Americans, don't worry about vital public services. Don't forget about that safety net for your neighbors. Take a tax break instead and let most of it go to the wealthy. Don't worry, it'll trickle down. That's what they told a lot of people. They told Americans, don't do the hard work of ensuring businesses in Wall Street behave responsibly. Deregulate them, and everything will be just fine. They told Americans, don't bother investing in the future. Focus on today, and someone else will have to worry about crumbling bridges, sewers, and electrical grids, and failing schools. And they said, don't bother investing in public transportation. Don't worry about making transit a part of the cleaner, environmentally responsible economy. Just keep driving on our choke highways. That's someone else's problem to worry about. They said, don't live and support our major cities, our major urban centers. You know, the urban centers that built America. Focus on the suburbs and let our cities corrode and deteriorate. And they said, don't organize unions. That's so 1950s. So old economy. We don't need unions. Just go on your way. The modern economy will take care of you. That was the message. And the tragedy is that a lot of our good people in this nation believed it. They believed that bill of goods. They voted for politicians whose core values were greed and cheap patriotism. Patriotism in words only, not in actions that actually benefited the nation and its working people. And for the past 3 decades or so, that effort to turn America into a land of borrowers and consumers has been eaten away at the foundations of this country. And now we are all reaping what we have sown. Borrowing and consuming took us from a prosperous economy to a shattered economy, from being the world's biggest lending nation to the biggest debtor nation, from having the world's strongest infrastructure to a nation with an aging infrastructure, with bridges literally falling down. And of course, it took us from being a country committed to building world-class public transit to a country where our public transit systems are in a state of crisis. I don't know about you, but I reject that vision. That's not what the ATU was born to do. That's not what the ATU does every day of the year, and that's not what we're going to do going forward. I can assure you that. I'm sick and tired of all the problems you're dealing with in what should be a growth industry, with transit budgets being cut, brothers and sisters being fired, services being slashed, and fares for working people being jacked up. And who gets hurt? Not the wealthy and the powerful who let our nation slip away. No, they're doing just fine with big tax cuts and big garages. The ones who suffer are the hardworking people in this country who built this nation to begin with. The factory worker who can barely afford his commute to a job that may not actually be there in the future. A waitress who struggles to afford bus fares that just spiked 20% while her wages got cut. The tens of millions of good, decent families out there who have to worry about how they get to work, how they get their kids to school, and how to get to their places of worship. They are the ones paying the price. And let me tell you something, those working people are sick and tired of it. Everywhere we look in this country, we see that anger. We see it in the news, we see it in the polls, we see it in our own lives. Now, too often, the anger is confused and I think misdirected. And it gives rise to sort of senseless movements that don't even know what they're fighting for. But I'm not here to judge working Americans who are fed up, because we've got lots in our ranks. I'm here today to challenge every single one of you to stand up and say, it's time for all of us to get together and point the finger at the ones who really got us into this fix, who got us into this economic, quote, ditch, close quote, as the president likes to say. It is time for all of us to get together and say, we're not buying that bill of goods again. It's time for us to say, we're going forward, making America a nation of builders again, like we have fought over the last 2 years with the president. And my friends, when we do that, when we reach out to our fellow citizens and talk to them about what it means to make this country a nation of builders again, then I promise you, we can win. We can win them over to support our priorities as a union and to vote for the right people who are looking for our vote, running for office. When we tell people that we're fighting for operational funding for mass transit, because it makes no sense to invest in buses and trains if there are no drivers or mechanics to operate them, then those people will support our message. And when we tell people that we're fighting to make public transit safer because it is a senseless tragedy when good people are hurt or killed in avoidable accidents, then the people will hear our call. They will support the fact that the Obama Department of Transportation, not the Bush, we were never in that building, is moving towards national safety measures for rail transit and inviting frontline workers, including this union, ATU, to be a part of the process. And people will support our efforts to ensure that this same commitment to safety, security, and good jobs must be applied to our interstate bus system, to your members at Greyhound who keep having to do more with less. It's time to finally crack down on those rogue operators who put Greyhound at risk, put your members at risk, and it's time to put an end to this nonsense. Let's start regulating all these operators to the highest standards possible, and your members will win. And by God, let's pass a surface transportation bill. America is broken. Our infrastructure is collapsing. We've got to pass a surface transportation bill, the bill that not only puts your members to work, but will rebuild America and rebuild the economy. We need $500 billion. That's right, $500 billion. They gave that away in the war in Iraq, it seemed like, weekly. If we can afford that kind of money overseas, we can rebuild this country with $500 billion. That's 6 million jobs in 6 years, my friends. 6 million jobs in 6 years. And let's be honest about the debate. Let's not just be like all politicians to talk about the need to invest in America. Let's figure out a way to pay for it. And if it means we got to raise the fuel tax, so be it. Or how about taxing big oil to pay for it? They made $656 billion in profits during the 8 years of George Bush. They can afford to help us build a surface transportation system. But we got to find the resources. And I know a lot of people don't believe that we're going to get this done. But I'm telling you, we're not going to stop fighting. The average working person doesn't oppose a fuel tax hike when it's going to help rebuild the country. They don't support a tax that they don't understand. They don't support a tax that is unfair. They don't support a tax that rescues CEOs from Wall Street. And then after getting bailed out by the taxpayers, turn around and give themselves billions in bonuses, which is what they did after the bailout. They don't support that kind of tax. But when it comes to using tax dollars to expand our transit system and our whole transportation infrastructure, to invest in our subways, trains, and bus lines, that is something the American people can understand. And with leaders who have the courage to make the case, and we have to give them that courage, then that is a cause the American people will support. You know this better than me. Ballot initiatives are passing around 70% of the time at the state level when they dedicate new funds for transportation. The politicians in Washington just aren't watching, and they don't seem to get it. The people in the cities and states do. And let me say one more thing. I absolutely guarantee you that the American people will support us when we go to them and make the case that it's time to start treating school bus drivers with the respect and dignity that they deserve. For God's sake, America's school bus drivers transport our nation's most precious cargo, our kids. 10 billion rides a year, but they don't enjoy the same workplace safety standards that millions of Americans take for granted. They don't have the protection of standard sick leave, which is so fundamental to their safety and the safety of the children they transport. They don't have protection from unsafe and unfair and reckless privatization that not only harms the workers, but harms the kids that those workers transport. And they don't even have one single body of jurisdiction in our government they can turn to fix these problems. The American people need to know about this outrage. They need to be enlisted in our cause. They need to understand that the cause of rail transit workers, of bus drivers and mechanics, of Greyhound workers, light rail workers, special needs operators, indeed the cause of all of your members, ATU, that cause is the American people's cause if we do our job to communicate to them. They need to know we're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for safe transit systems, we're fighting for skilled workplaces and workers, we're fighting to shorten the American people's commutes, clean their air, spare another city of the horror of the Minneapolis bridge collapse. This isn't our fight. This is their fight. And they need to understand that. That is up to you and us as a labor movement to make sure that our fight is their fight. And we have to continue to go forward that way. The demagogues on Fox News and some of the more extreme forces in the Republican Party know what they're doing. They don't want the American people to understand that. They want to confuse the American people, divide them, and mislead them. They want to create tea parties and divide us on issues of race, religion, guns, sexual orientation, and God knows what else. They don't want to engage the nation on the economy because they were in charge not very long ago of our economy. And that economy was on its deathbed to Bushonomics. Remember that? We're going to stimulate the top 2% of wage earners, the billionaires. And then the rest of America will get its fair share. Really? Something went wrong there. And now, as the president always says, they want us to have amnesia in November. They don't really care about the problems you and I care about. They want to take us backwards because that's where their supporters want to go. And make no mistake, our current challenges are no accident. They're the result of failed leadership that was in power only a few years ago. We have a budget deficit today because they passed trillions of dollars in unaffordable tax cuts for people that didn't need them. We had bank bailouts because Wall Street was running wild with no oversight. We have a shattered economy because they abandoned the middle class and they weakened unions deliberately. We have a jobs crisis because they allowed our manufacturing base to crumble because we don't make things in America like we used to, and the middle class is shrinking for it. We have decaying schools, collapsing bridges, broken highways, choked airports, starved transit systems, all because they refuse to build our infrastructure and invest in our future. For 8 long years, George Bush had this economy, but he allowed corporate donors to run it, and then they ran it into that ditch we've been hearing about. They took America from a nation of builders to a nation of borrowers and consumers. And so I say to you again, this is a moment of choosing. And I know where I stand. I stand for making America a nation of builders again. And I make that choice knowing that it won't be easy. The worthwhile things that we have built in this country, our public transportation system, our national defense, our schools, our universities and hospitals, and our free institutions. None of those were built overnight. In fact, they took decades, often generations. Making the commitments required to accomplish those great deeds were among the greatest acts of faith by Americans. To commit to something important knowing that we may not live to see its fruition. But that is exactly what our parents did, what our grandparents did, and what our great-grandparents did. And that is what we are doing today as a movement. We are trying to transform our nation and its economy, and we cannot turn back, my friends. We cannot turn back to those dark days. And let me tell you something. If there's a man in this country who understands that we can't turn back, it's the one who happens to sit in the White House. Is he perfect? No. Does he make every right decision or call? No, he doesn't. But give me a president who gets up each morning and asks himself what is right, not what is popular. A president who fought for hundreds of billions of dollars, including billions for your industry, to rescue our economy when others were letting it wither. Give me a president who puts his heart and soul and his re-election on the line for health care reform when others wouldn't have tried. A president who went to war with the most powerful titans of Wall Street and came out standing tall when others would have cowered. Or a president who doesn't sell cheap patriotism, doesn't seek to divide us with his own gain, who doesn't trade fear for votes, and who believes we will rebuild the middle class by rebuilding the labor movement. When's the last time anyone here ever hear a person in the Oval Office who says we will not rebuild the middle class if we don't rebuild the labor movement? That's what we have in the Oval Office. So give me a president who is willing to lose an election before he loses his soul. And God knows we've seen plenty of politicians lose their soul. That is the president we have, one who values your service, your members' hard work, and honors your dedication to your job, your family, and the communities in which you live. There's a famous story of President Kennedy going to visit a NASA center during preparations for Neil Armstrong's flight to the moon. While visiting the site, President Kennedy shook hands with a janitor, and he asked the janitor, quote, "What do you do here?" And the janitor responded, "Why, Mr. President, I'm helping to put an American on the moon. Those are the values of this nation, of this movement, of a just nation, respecting the job that all Americans do. And I believe that's what's on the ballot in November. We're pushing forward, not backward, and that can only happen if every single one of us, all of you, does your job, not only in going to the polls, but in getting everyone you know to the polls. The opponents of what we stand for are counting on our members staying home, are voting for the wrong reasons. Let's disappoint them. You need to dig deep. Whatever you're doing, it's not enough. You got to work harder. More time, more energy, more enthusiasm. We have 37 days to fight for the future of this nation. Brothers and sisters, as the fall elections draw very near, tell your coworkers, friends, and families to look in the rearview mirror. ATU doesn't need to look in the rearview mirror, but maybe you should look for a second too. 15 years ago, when an election similar to this one took hold of this nation, what was the very first act on the floor of the House to attack unions in America? They tried to repeal 13C, collective bargaining rights for your members. The very first act. By the way, excuse my language, we beat their ass, but you know what? We don't want to go back there. We don't want to go back to a time when politicians think that the way you go forward is you go backwards on worker rights. In that rearview mirror, they'll also see the Bush economy, losing 800,000 jobs a month. Millions of desperate Americans losing health care at a record pace, while the Bush White House coddled insurance companies. In that rearview mirror, you'll see public transit systems withering with a White House that didn't care. You'll see pro-privatization ideologues running the transportation department. And all those guys today are in the private sector trying to sack your members and privatize everything they can. I'm not looking back anymore, and America can't return to those days. I'm asking you to stand and fight because it is what's best for this union. We need elected leaders who will fight for you and your members. I'm asking you to stand and fight because it is what is best for the nation's public transportation system. We need elected leaders who make public transit a part of our future, a centerpiece of our transportation policies. And above all, I'm asking you to stand and fight because it is what's best for our nation, and it is because that's what labor does in this country. We're living in a crucial moment, brothers and sisters. We will look back on these days in the next 37 days and say either this was a moment our nation returned to those days we can occasionally see in the rearview mirror, or we'll look back and say that this was the moment when this movement rallied to save the heart and soul of this country, to keep our progress on track. Yes, this was a moment when America stayed on a course to bring prosperity to all Americans, not just to those with power and wealth. This was the moment that America became a nation of builders again. This is worth fighting for. This is worth sacrificing for. This is worth putting it all on the line. Now let's go do that, ATU. You've been doing it your whole life. We got 37 days. Thank you. God bless all of you, and God bless this movement.